We can hear you, sir.
Right. So we'll start then. It's about a 2-hour lesson. And today, what we are going to do is we are going to learn about the basic concepts of internal audit. Most of this, I'm sure, you are aware, but nevertheless, we have to learn the theoretical aspects through your practical work that you carry out. Some of these concepts you are already applying. You will realize that you are applying when you learn all this. So for some of you, it may be nothing new. Now, there is a change to this IPPF framework. When you talk about internal auditing, the Institute of Internal Auditors has issued a framework. It's called IPPF, International Professional Practices Framework. This is the framework. So as you can see, this framework encompasses a mission, principles of internal auditing, the definition of internal auditing, the standards of internal auditing. They call it the professional standards, international standards for the professional practice of internal auditing. Very long and lengthy way to call it. So basically it's a standard, and then you have the code of ethics. Apart from that, you have the implementation guidance and the supplemental guidance. So this is your Bible. If you want to learn about internal auditing, you have to get a good understanding of the IPP framework, International Professional Practices Framework. Now, when you look at this framework, you can see there are two aspects: mandatory guidance and non-mandatory. Mandatory guidance means you have to follow it, you must do it. So what are the mandatory aspects of the IPPF? The core principles, the definition, the standards, and the code of ethics. So at the exam, you might be asked, what constitutes the mandatory aspects? So they will have 4, except for core principles, definition, standards, and they might put implementation guidance. So implementation guidance is the odd one out. Because implementation guidance and supplemental guidance only provides guidance in regards to implementing a standard. They do not form, so it's additional information in the framework. It does not form the mandatory elements. The mandatory elements, there are 4 principles, definitions, standards, and code of ethics. And that could be an MCQ. Now, around all this, the mandatory guidance and the non-mandatory guidance, or voluntary or what, or recommended guidance, yeah, at the bottom. So you have mandatory guidance and recommended guidance. Recommended guidance is not mandatory. They recommend it. But mandatory guidance is you have to follow it. Then, now the new standards don't have these sort of mandatory, recommended, they don't have, and the core principles, definition, standards, code of ethics are all bundled together, and they just call it the global internal audit standards. So this new set of standards, right? New set of standards which have already been not issued yet. They have been put out, and to obtain public comments. So it's exposure draft stage, put out, obtaining to get feedback from various stakeholders, from the internal audit fraternity, from industry, from practitioners, from the general public. So all of them have now given their feedback, and they are in the form of preparing the final version of the global internal audit standards. Now, the new global internal audit standards contains a code of ethics definition. You don't have it separately. Everything is together. So the next question is, if you are planning to sit for the exam next year, and the IIA goes and issues the standards in let's say now November or December, right? Latter half of 2023, they'll issue. When they issue the standards, what happens is it will be effective from 12 months from that date, 12 months from the issuing date. So if they issue it in November 23, it will be effective in November 24. So I researched this. I wanted to see whether they'll test you on the old standards or the new standards. And what I found out was that they will change the exams only when it's effective. That is from next November or December. So I think you are safe. So we can still go through, but what we must understand is all these standards, even you introduce new standards, 80% it's all the same, right? It has been now restructured, new elements have come in, but it's 80%, it's more or less the same. So you don't have to be worried. Most likely, if you're sitting for any exams after 2024 November, then you might have it in the new. You must quickly read up on the new standards, which will be more or less similar to the old standards, but regrouped, rearranged, restructured, and all that. So this is the Bible in front of you, what you can see on the screen, right? So let's go to the first slide. The Institute of Internal Auditors defines the mission. So what is the mission? Now we all have a mission. Company has a mission. Internal audit functions also now have a mission to enhance and protect organizational value. We are supposed to protect organization value, that is shareholder wealth, stakeholder wealth, whatever the value of the organization, assets and the goodwill. We have to protect it or enhance it. Protect it, enhance it, increase it. But how do we do this? So our overarching aim, if they ask you the question, what is the overarching aim of internal audit, is to protect organization or to enhance organizational value. That's the overarching aim, and you must not forget that. Sometimes you might go and select improving governance processes, improving controls, improving, all those are correct, but that is not the overarching aim, because internal audit has a mission, and the mission states that we as auditors, we need to protect organizational value or enhance it. But how do we do this? We have to provide assurance, advice, and insight, AAI. We provide assurance, we provide advice, we provide insight. Now, what is assurance? Assurance is there is a control in place, and we tell the board, you know, this control is designed well, it's operating well. Because as internal auditors, we have to look at the design of the control. That is one thing. Then we have to look at the operating effectiveness. That is, you can have a good control, well-designed control, but if it is not being implemented, if it is not operating effectively, you check 10 vouchers and you find that the finance director has not approved 3, that means it is not operating effectively in 30% of the cases. So assurance is something like we give comfort to someone, and that someone is the board of directors. Auditor gives comfort to the board of directors. That control is working well. That control is designed. That is assurance. When we do an external audit, external auditors give assurance to the shareholders, not to the board, to the shareholders, that these financial statements have been prepared according to IFRS. There are no material misstatements, whether due to fraud or whatever. And it gives a true and fair view, right? That is assurance. So as internal auditors, we give assurance on the way the company manages its risks. Right now, companies face risks, and as internal auditors, we give assurance to the board that the controls are managing the risks the company faces effectively, right? So that is also assurance we give, but our assurance is given not to the shareholders, but to the board. Now, when we give assurance, especially internal auditors can perform assurance engagements. Internal auditors can also perform consulting engagements, both types, right? Assurance or consulting. So now when we give specifically assurance engagements, we must ensure that we are independent and objective. That is very important. We have to be objective. Objective means we must not have any conflicts of interest as the auditor. We must not be biased towards anyone. We must not be influenced by anyone. That is objective. We must be independent. That means we shouldn't have any impairments to independence. How we gain independence, how the function achieves independence, we will look at it later. Then they say when we provide assurance or when we provide advice, now objectivity and risk-based assurance only we must give. When we give advice, it must be objective. That is, we are independent, we are objective. And so whatever we do, we must be risk-based. Right? If we are checking the state of controls, the controls that we check must be risk-based. Those days when we went to do an audit, we just went to a company and studied the internal controls and said those controls are working well or not. Now they say, oh, hold it, you can't do that. Now you have to go 2 steps back and find out what are the objectives of the organization. Then what are the risks the organization faces, which will make it difficult for the organization to achieve those objectives. Then for those risks, we must have controls. So when we check controls, sometimes we might find our controls must be linked to a risk. Risk-based controls only we need to see. Company can have 100 controls, out of which 70 may be linked to risks. The other 30, it doesn't matter really. So our assurance that we give must be risk-based. When we advise the board or at audit committee or the board, it must be risk-based, right? High-risk issues. When we give findings in our reports and put it as high or medium, it must really be high risk or medium risk. Everything is risk-based, from the planning of the audit, scheduling of the audit, writing the report, presenting findings, rating findings, communicating findings. Everything is risk-based, where we focus on the key risks. And we have to be objective, right? We are not part of the management. We have to have that objective independence view we have to give. So that's why they say when we advise the management on improvements to internal control, sometimes we give assurance, sometimes we say, no, this control, you have to use this risk-based methodology, you have to improve the internal control like this. So that is advice. We give advice. And we must give insight. Insight is more futuristic. Company is going to merge with someone. So then we in advance tell the board, oh, you have these sort of risks in advance. Because assurance is historical. Advice is more present. And insight means you give the board a heads up on what sort of risks they may face in the future and take proactive action, not reactive, proactive action now to address those risks. So we have to, as internal auditors, we have to protect organizational wealth or value, or whatever you call it. We have to increase it. And how we do that is we provide assurance, advice, and insight. We must ensure that whatever advice or assurance or insight we provide, it is risk-based. No point telling the management implement this control if it does not really mitigate a risk. Right? No point providing insight if it is really not addressing a risk, a future risk that the organization may encounter. Right? So that is something that you need to keep in mind. The second aspect is facilitating the achievement of this mission is the IPPF. So the mission is one, and how you help the organization to achieve that is you have to follow this framework, right? That's why they say facilitating the achievement of this mission is the IPPF. So if you implement this, if you carry out your work according to this, then you can achieve your mission. The IPPF organizes the IIA's guidance, which is accessible and strengthens. Forget it. IPPF contains two aspects: mandatory guidance and recommended guidance. Now, if you are a certified internal auditor, you have got the certification. If you are a member of the Institute of Internal Audit, or let's say you are working in an organization, you are not a member, you do not hold the certification, but the company has an internal audit manual which is based on IIA standards. In such cases, certification holder, member, or there is a SOP in your company where you're supposed to carry out your audits according to the standards. Then if the mandatory guidance, you must follow. Mandatory guidance, you have to follow. Recommended guidance, you don't have to follow. So those are that little bit you have to, so it's not the theory. I hope I have conveyed to you the meaning of what the mission is all about, what we are supposed to do as auditors. So then mandatory guidance, recommended guidance, and this also we discussed. So all this will be now restructured according to global internal audit standards. Mandatory guidance. Adherence to the mandatory guidance is essential. Not only essential, it's a must, really, for the professional practice of internal auditing. The mandatory guidance consists of 4 elements, which we talked about. 4 elements: core principles, definitions, standards, and code of ethics. And core principles. So now let's look at the core principles. Core principles are the basis for internal audit effective. So if you want to have an internal audit function and you want it to be effective, effective means it achieves the mission, it achieves the definition of internal auditing, what you're supposed to do, then they say these principles must be followed. Auditors must carry out their work to the highest level of integrity. We must demonstrate, exhibit, display the highest level of integrity. If we are dishonest, we do not carry out our work according to the standards, if we break laws of the country, if we carry out criminal offenses, then we do not have integrity. So the board, the management trusts an internal auditor, and the basis or the foundation of this trust is based on integrity and ethics, right? Very important. Demonstrate competence and due professional care. That is all about, if you are an internal auditor, you must be skilled, knowledgeable, skilled, and experienced. You must be competent. You must be competent. This is very, very important. And exercise due professional care. That is, when you're doing something, do it carefully. Don't be negligent. Do it as if, you know, if you are painting a wall, you can paint it in a negligent way, or you can do it carefully. So due professional care is all about being careful, methodical, conscientious when you do the audit. Competent means you have to have the necessary technical skills alone, and the experience. If you do not have the competence, then your internal audits won't be effective, right? You will not be able to deliver what the management wants you to deliver. Then they say the audit function must be independent. The audit function must be independent. And the auditor must be objective. Auditor must be objective and be free from undue influence. So basically, the auditor must display objectivity, and the function must be independent. So when you look at these two words, objectivity and independence, they say the function must be independent. The auditor must be objective. How the function is independent is we have a dual reporting line. The head of audit has a dual reporting line. Functional reporting to the audit committee or to the board. Administrative reporting to the CEO. So by reporting functionally to the board and not to the CEO or the finance director. We are independent. We report to the directors directly. For the function to be independent, that dual reporting line must be in place. And as an auditor, we must be objective and free from undue influence, no conflicts of interest. Then they say, so these are integrity, displaying integrity, demonstrating competence, demonstrating professional care, being objective, function being independent. These are all attributes the auditor or the function must possess. Now, they say here, when we do the audit, our audit activities must align with the strategies, objectives, and risks of the organization. That is, we must be risk-based. So we have to start our work. They tell you to develop audit plan, start with the strategy. Look at the strategic goals, then look at the strategic risks, then see how it cascades into business level risks, functional level, business level KPIs, functional level KPIs, and then at the function division level, what are their objectives, and then look at the risks. So that is the process you have to follow. It has to be risk-based. If we prepare an audit plan without even looking at the strategies and the strategic goals and considering what risks the company faces in trying to achieve those goals, if we do not consider all that, then our plan will be useless. We will be checking controls, true, but those controls, when we say those controls are working, it will not give any assurance to the board that the company will achieve its objectives. Because you see, in internal audit, what we do is we give assurance to the board that the company will achieve its goals. How we do that is we tell the company board that the risks are managed effectively. So if the risks are managed well, the company will achieve its goals. Right? Then they say, the internal audit department will say our function must be appropriately positioned. That is the dual reporting line, and must be adequately resourced. The department needs 25 people, then 5 people if you have is not enough. That will affect the quality of the work. Then they say that the activity, audit activity must demonstrate quality and continuous improvement. There must be a quality assurance program. Like any other, if you take audit firms, we have quality assurance reviews where foreigners come and check our files and say, things are good or bad. Or there's a accreditation process. And then there's a constant or continuous improvement process. So that must be there. So the auditor must demonstrate the function must have a quality assurance review program. That is, once in a way, internally and externally, there are quality reviews that are done and must continuously improve. So if you have internal audit function and which is not subject to quality reviews by internally or by an external party, then your department function will not be very effective. Because if it's to be effective, core principles are the basis for internal audit effectiveness. Means that focus on quality, that monitoring of quality, and then the continuous improvement must be there. Internal audit function communicates effectively. Yes, you must communicate effectively. So very recently, a chap called Phil Tarling, he was the president of the IIA. I can remember when I used to go for these conferences when I was part of the IIA board. He was the president 10, 15 years ago, and he passed away 3-4 days ago. And I can remember the theme of his conference was say it right. Say it right. That means as auditors, we have to communicate effectively and say it when it matters. When we say it, we have to articulate it properly, effectively, so that we can communicate the message properly. Then we must provide risk-based assurance. That's important. We provide assurance, but risk-based. Whatever controls we look at, be it because we look at all sorts of processes. We look at governance processes. We look at risk management processes. We look at control processes. So all these reviewing of those processes, providing assurance to the board regarding those processes, it must be risk-based. Then they say we must be insightful, proactive, and future-focused. So that is like providing advice and insight. Right? Because providing assurance is usually historical. We are looking at the past and saying yes, or at the present and things are okay. But we must be a little futuristic and predict what is going to come because of the changes taking place in the environment, industry. It can be political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal, whatever. We should be able to predict those and provide proactive advice to the management. Be a little futuristic, read up, be aware of what's going on in the industry. When you're at that management meeting, speak up, tell something that they do not know, give them some insight, right? And we must promote organizational improvement. Here, look at this. This is a very general statement. These sort of words should not be there. When you say organizational improvement, what does it mean? Improving an organization, not the best of principles, isn't it? So generally, they say we must improve. Improvement. We will see what sort of improvement, in what areas, mainly in governance, risk management, and controls. And that is what you call GRC. So see, some qualities A, B, C is related to the internal auditor. Some principles D is related to how you do your audit. Then E is how the department, E, F is also about how the department function, attributes of the function. Communicate effectively is about the internal auditor. Then H, I, J, these are all things that the internal auditor, I up to I is what the internal auditor should do, and ultimately the function should promote organizational improvement. So they say these are important principles. I think there are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 principles. This is a mandatory element. So we talked about now the core principles, that is this. Let's go to the definition, right? So how many are there in the class today? Let me see. Okay, so there are 14. Right, 14. So this IPPF framework also has a section for the definition of internal auditing. That is, they are going to define what internal auditing is. So let's break it up now. Internal audit is an independent objective assurance and consulting activity. So see, we provide two sorts of engagements. We provide consulting engagement sometimes as an internal auditor, where we are called upon to maybe, they might say we are, that the company is implementing an ERP, and for us to provide advice, maybe to review the controls and recommend something. So that is consulting. Maybe to help in the implementation of an ERM, look at the risk management processes, that is consulting. They're going to embark on a new project. What are the risks that are there? Consulting. They're going to implement ERP. Are the controls good or bad or ugly? Consulting. Or we do an assurance engagement. Two types. But we must be independent and objective. Can you see? Whatever work that we do, be it assurance or consulting, it is preceded by these two important words that emphasizes the fact that internal auditing must provide independent assurance, objective assurance. That is why before we do the assignment, we must ensure that everyone in the team is independent. We can't have any brothers and sisters in the auditee function, right? You cannot have some link. They might later say, oh, the auditor is not independent enough. And what is the internal audit expected to do? Internal auditing is designed to add value. Can you see this? Add value here. We have to add value. We have to improve an organization's operations. So our focus is mainly not on financials. That is the job of the external auditor, right? Our job is to focus on add value and improve an organization's operations. But how do we do that? If someone comes and tells you, can you please, your job is to improve an organization's operations. Your job is to add value. So naturally, you might ask, how do I add value? How do I improve an organization's operations? Am I supposed to be looking at manufacturing processes and commenting on productivity improvement? Well, how we accomplish that, how we add value and how we improve an organization's operations is we evaluate and improve the effectiveness of GRC. That's what we do. So when we are called upon to do an internal audit, what we do is we evaluate, we examine, we assess, and then we make recommendations to improve what? Governance processes, risk management processes, and control processes. That's what we do. And if we follow the standards, our approach can guarantee that it will be systematic and disciplined. So it will be a systematic and disciplined approach to evaluate and improve GRC, the effectiveness of GRC, effectiveness. So if we can, whenever we do an audit, let's say the procurement department or the HR department, look at the governance processes, look at the risk management processes, look at the controls that they have, and try to improve, evaluate those processes and improve the effectiveness of those processes, make it more effective controls. Then indirectly what will happen is we will add value and improve an organization's operations. So overarching aim is to protect value, create value by providing what was that, risk-based objective assurance, insight, advice. To do that, our main objective is to add value and improve operations by approaching the audit in a disciplined, systematic approach. We have to take. Can you see those words in the definitions? How we ensure that we take a disciplined, systematic approach. How we do that is by following the IPPA framework. So if you follow the framework, invariably what would happen is you will be doing the audit in a very systematic and disciplined manner, right? And you must evaluate and improve the effectiveness of risk management processes, control processes, and governance processes. Control is a process, right? I hope now you have a good understanding of what the mission of internal audit, the fact that there are two elements, mandatory and recommended, the components of the mandatory elements, what the core principles are, the attributes that an internal auditor or the internal audit function should possess, and then the definition of internal auditing, the fact that there are two types of work, the fact that internal auditing, for an internal auditor to be trusted, for an audit function to be trustworthy, we must be independent and objective. If we lose our independence, if we lose our objectivity, we've lost it. We've lost the battle. Independence, objectivity, integrity form the basis of trust, right? That the management or the board has on the internal auditors. Integrity, independence, and objective. If you lose one of those three, we will no longer be trustworthy. You think about all that. That's why you have these words in these definitions itself. Why did they go and put that word objective there? Why did they put the word independent there? Here's the reason. And why are they talking about GRC? The core function of an internal auditor is to evaluate and improve. Before you improve, you have to evaluate, no? You have to examine. You do that and you improve the effectiveness of GRC. Standards. So now see the long words. Can you see this? So the standards, it's formally called International Standards for the Professional Practice of Internal Auditing. and that will change to global IIA standards, international standards, effective from next year, right? So this is going to change. So there are 4 purposes for the standards. Can you read this? Why? What are the main 4 purposes? MCQ might ask that. There are 4 purposes. Because you see, all the answers are correct to some extent sometimes. So you have to pick the best answer given the context of the question. So here we are talking about the purpose. They say the standards serve the following 4 purposes described by the IIA. Can you just run through it before I discuss it? So one of the purposes is to guide adherence with the mandatory elements. So these standards, if you follow the standards, you will abide by or comply with the definition, core principles, and the code of ethics. The standards help you to comply with the other three elements. Correct? No? Guide adherence with the mandatory elements. Standards will provide the guidance. You do the audit according to the standard, then you will comply with the mandatory elements in the framework. Provide a framework for performing. Yeah. Now, if you go somewhere and someone asks you, now if they ask the external auditor, what is the external auditor? That is the statutory auditor who audits the financial statements. They ask that auditor, what is the framework that you use? So in Sri Lanka, they will say we use the Sri Lanka auditing standards. Similarly, if they ask the internal auditor, what is the framework you use? You can't say you don't have a framework. You will say you're using the IPPF framework. Out of all those 3 components, the definition, the core principles, the mission, the code of ethics, it is the standards which are most important. Standards provide the framework on how to perform the audit, plan the audit, and how to promote a lot of audit type services. Establish the basis for evaluation. Now, if I want to evaluate your performance as an internal auditor, I have to have a standard to compare your work with, no? Isn't it? If I can compare, if there's a standard only, I can. Now, the standard might say before you start the audit, do a risk assessment, have a documented plan, get it approved by the engagement partner. Like that, the standard will tell what needs to be done. Then, if I want to assess your performance, evaluate internal audit performance, I can compare what you have actually done with what is in the standard. So it provides a basis for evaluation. Right? It provides a basis. If you don't have the standards, how can you compare and do an evaluation against what? And then very generically they say, improve organizational processes and operations. It helps to foster improved organizational processes and operations. Foster improved organizational processes and operations. That's if you do the if you follow the standards, it will help to improve organization processes, but mainly governance processes, risk management, and control processes. Huh? So these are the 4. So it just talks about standards are important to ensure compliance with the mandatory elements. It helps It provides a framework on how to do the audit. It provides a framework to measure performance against or evaluate audit performance, and it helps to improve organizational processes. So standards, if you take the standards can be divided into two categories. The new version that's going to come out, there won't be two categories. That's why I'll tell you a few changes as we go along. One is called attribute standards, is important. The other one is called performance standards. Attribute standards tell us what sort of attributes the internal auditor or the internal audit department should possess. The attributes: the internal auditor must be objective, internal audit department must be independent, internal auditor must be competent, internal auditor must maintain CPD, internal auditor must follow the code of ethics. So attributes that the auditor should possess. Attributes the auditor should possess. So attribute standards provide guidelines or guidance on the attributes that the auditor should possess, or the audit activity, the function as a whole should possess. The function should be independent. The function should be subject to quality assurance review. Performance standards, on the other hand, provide guidance on how to do the audit, how to perform the audit, how to plan the audit, how to write the report, how to present the findings, how to do the risk assessment, how to do a fraud risk assessment, how to perform the audit, from the scoping, planning, performing, reviewing, preparing the report, presenting, following up. So attribute standards provide guidance on what sort of attributes the function or the auditor should have, while the performance standards provide guidance on what on how to do the audit, how to perform the audit, right? So attribute standards always start with the number 1, 1001, 1101, 1000, 1100, 1200, 1300, like. Performance standards start with the number 2. That's one way of distinguishing between the standards. In the new global internal audit standards, you don't have these two categories. All standards are divided into 5 domains. Domains Park, you have 5 domains, and everything is divided into those 5 domains. You don't have performance that, and there is code of ethics separate. It has been incorporated into the standards. At the end of the day, code of ethics is what? The normal standards are technical. Code of ethics are behavioral standards. It governs how an internal auditor should behave. Internal auditor must behave with integrity, maintain integrity. Internal auditor must be objective. Internal auditor must be competent. Internal auditor must ensure confidentiality. Those are the 4 pillars in the code of ethics of the Institute of Internal Auditors: competence, confidence, integrity, and there was one more. No, internal auditors must act with integrity. They must be competent. They must maintain confidentiality, and they must display integrity. So those are the 4. Now, attribute standard 1000. The title of that is Purpose, Authority, and Responsibility. Purpose, authority, and responsibility. The purpose, authority, and responsibility. What is the purpose of the internal audit activity? What sort of authority should the internal audit activity have? And what are the responsibilities of the internal audit activity? So they say must be formally defined in an internal audit charter. Now we all know, right? Every organization, if you all have an internal audit function, if you all have a function, that function must have a document. Like if you have a company, you must have the articles of association. Similarly, if it is what you call, the function has to have its own constitution, and that constitution is called the internal audit charter. Now, in the internal audit charter, you must specify 3 things: the purpose, authority, and responsibility. So there's a question. Yes. So once you do the exam, you wait for about 30 seconds. Your results are given immediately. Immediate. Once you finish, I can remember I sat for the exam, finished the last finished button or submit button, the results come. In about 10-20 seconds, they give you pass or fail. So the internal audit charter of a internal audit function of a company must specify what is the purpose of audit. Now the purpose of audit is given where? So what you have to do is include the definition. The purpose of audit is to what? Help an organization accomplish its objectives. Now, any organization has objectives, goals, strategic goals. So the purpose of the internal audit is to help organization achieve its objectives. How they do that is, so that is the objective. Accomplish its objectives. Organization tries to accomplish objectives. There are risks which get in the way. And then you evaluate those risk mitigation, risk management, control, and governance processes and see whether they are properly working. If they are working effectively, then the organization will achieve its objectives. So our main goal is to add value and improve an organization's operations. So if you can include this will give the purpose of the audit. Purpose of the audit that is given. It will also give you the authority. What is authority? Authority means that we have to have access to all documents, to all people, to all spaces, to all systems relevant to our scope of work. So that power is given in the internal audit charter. That must be included. They might have, what authority do you have to ask questions from these process owners? What authority do you have to request for that document? Well, we say, this is our charter. This was approved by the board. So this board approved internal audit charter gives us the authority to request for these documents. Responsibility is also given there. Our responsibility is to improve. So purpose, responsibility, more or less the same thing. So it's formally defined in the charter. Charter is consistent with the mission and the mandatory elements, core principles and all that. Chief audit executive must periodically review the internal audit chart and present it to management and the board for approval. So every year what happens is the internal audit head, in this literature you call it the chief audit executive. That person must review it annually and see whether any changes need to be made, and then give it to the senior management for their input, and then put it to the audit committee or to the board. Right? So here it's very important that even the charter, the internal audit head does not work solely with the audit committee. He must present it to senior management. Can you see the input of the corporate management? Senior management must be obtained. Because the senior management also is part of the preparation of the, not preparation, you prepare it as the head of audit. Then you share it with them, senior management, and ask for their comments. They might tell to remove something, but it's not their decision. Fine, approval is with the board, but you give it for their input. Consider they might have some useful points to note, which they recommend. So amend it accordingly, and then the board for approval. It must be board approved. So what usually happens in a company is approved by the audit committee, and the audit committee recommends it to the board, and the board paper is formulated, and that board paper will be approved. So that is the process. So performance standards start with 2000. Can you see number 2? They govern the nature of internal auditing, how to do the audit, the quality aspects, how to perform the audit, how to evaluate the performance of the auditors or the audit function. Right? So here we have one example they are given, performance standards 2120. It's if you go to performance standard 2120, the title of that standard is risk management. The internal audit activity must evaluate the effectiveness and contribute to the improvement of risk management process. Can you see what the standard says? As an internal auditor, you can't just look at processes. You must evaluate the effectiveness of risk management processes. How do they identify risks? How do they evaluate risks? Are the risk treatments in place good enough? Are any improvements need to be made to the risk management methodology that is adopted? Improvements to the way the company identifies its risks or rate its risks or all that, and must improve the risk management processes. So this is very, very important, right? So it says the activity must evaluate. When you're performing the audit, you must look at the risk management project. It can be any department. You can be checking accounts receivable or accounts payable. It could be procurement. It could be marketing. Look at and see how the risks in that department are managed. Are there risk registers? Are there proper processes in place? This is very important. Then there is interpretation standards. You remember, we talked about this in implementation guidance and supplemental guidance. So you have that, forget about it, right? That's not important. Yeah, so there are further guidance that they say internal audit activity must be free from interference in determining the scope of internal auditing, performing work, communicating the results. Chief audit executive must disclose such interference to the board and discuss the implications. So sometimes when we draft the audit scope and share it with the management, they say, remove this, no need to check that. No, what are you going to check here? Don't audit that department, audit it next year. Instead audit this. So the basis is that the internal audit scope, if the internal audit function is to be independent and remain effective, the internal audit scope is approved by the board, not by the management. So once you develop your scope, that scope, right, the audit plan, the program, you have to give it to the management for their input. Senior management input must always be obtained. But just because they recommend something, if you feel it is not something that should be considered, right, then you have the right to discuss the implications and tell that these people are trying to interfere. Then let the audit committee decide. Let the audit committee decide what to do. It's their call. The audit committee tells you don't do this, then it's not your problem. You don't have to be bothered too much about it. But it's your duty to see what is suggested by the management. Is it helpful or unhelpful? Are they trying to avoid certain things being audited or departments? To make the correct recommendation to the board. So board, audit committee, same thing. Here they use the word board, the final authority, but generally what happens is it's the audit committee, right? But everything that is presented to the audit committee finally at some point goes to the board. So there can be interference when you're drafting the scope or when you're doing your work. Sometimes they don't give documents, sometimes they delay, sometimes they don't cooperate, or when you're preparing your report, they will say, don't put this observation or downgrade this risk or something like that. So all that is interference. So they say the internal audit activity must be free from such interference. Yeah. So how it becomes free from such interference is through that dual reporting line where functionally you report to the board audit committee. Right? The core principles and the definition of internal auditing are encompassed in the Code of Ethics and Standards. Yeah. So all those core principles are included somewhere in the standards. Right? The definition, all that. So how you can abide or comply with the principles or with the definition. If you follow the Code of Ethics, if you follow the standards, you're anyway complying with the principles. If you follow the Code of Ethics, you're complying with the principles and the definitions. Right? So thus conformance with the code and standards demonstrates conformance with all mandatory elements. So what they are basically saying is the IPPA framework can have 4 mandatory elements, but follow the standards and the code of ethics. If you do that, you're already complying with the principles and the definition. Recommended guidance means you don't have to do it, right? There are 2 types, implementation and supplemental. That also there might be an MCQ. Just remember the word. They might put without putting supplemental. They might put complementary guidance or something like that. Without putting implementation, they might put additional guidance. So IG and SG. IG and SG, implementation guidance, supplemental guidance. So that's additional guidance, which helps the auditor to apply the standards. Purpose, authority. So let's go into that now. So we'll have a 2-minute break. 2 minutes. Huh?